Stan Heuston for the Church of Democratic Enlightenment, Code, with the first talk in the Code series, Free Speech on Agenda, You Are Silencing Them. Though Code has a heavy theoretical foundation, this first talk addresses the practical problem of generations of North American and Australian humanities university students being educated in an anti-democratic elitist ideology, one manifestation of that being shutting down free speech. This talk, 1A, has the subtitle Absolutism. It examines a debate posted on YouTube on the Canadian TV show Agenda between Alice McLaughlin, Professor of Philosophy at York University in Canada, Rachel DeCoste, community organiser, motivational speaker and Huffington Post blogger, Janice Fiamengo, Professor of English at Ottawa University, and Justin Trottier, National Policy Director at the Centre for Inquiry, moderated by Steve Paikin. This talk favours the view of free speech presented by Fiamengo and Trottier against McLaughlin and DeCoste and against the contemporary or radical feminism they are taken as representing, both in its approach to free speech and by extension of that fundamental question generally. In this talk, I think I therefore take over Trottier's and Fiamengo's polemical role a bit, especially Fiamengo's, though I'm arguing more narrowly just on absolutism. Contemporary feminism is seen as one form of a standard threat to democracy, involving the absolutist attitude of certainty that one's opinions are correct, which justifies the suppression of others' opinions as wrong. It is a certainty with an emotional basis of the kind that has made the word of monarchs, religious leaders and modern dictators unquestionable, as opposed to the democratic view that all opinions should be freely expressed and tested by reason among a people who are equal in their right to hold and express opinions. Future talks are not finalised and may have to be split into A, B, C, etc., each talk indicating the number and letter of the one following. I'll maintain a full list at www.churchofdemocraticenlightenment.com on the Theory and Practice page and collect the talks into a book. The subtitle heading of this talk is, as I said, Absolutism, and the two other headings under which I will examine this agenda program in the next talk or talks are fabrication and evasion. Other words for absolutism could be arbitrariness or authoritarianism. As I said, it refers to a superhuman judgment, a sense of infallibility that justifies suppression. The view here is that anyone who engages in these three practices in a debate, or pretty obviously absolutism or fabrication alone, loses credibility. That is, they are inconsistent with a commitment to truth and reason. I see no reason why Professor McLaughlin and Rachel DeCoste should not be taken as representative of contemporary feminism, as they appear to be as capable spokespeople as any that movement possesses. If they are discredited, so is contemporary radical feminism. Absolutism. I think it is interesting that McLaughlin and DeCoste deployed the same tools of absolutism. In Anti-Democracy, Talk 4 to come, I'll argue that the structures of attempts to overturn democracy are always in principle the same. The infallible judgment, the right to shut down speakers and debate, and a view of their own precedents in the use of public university resources are all common to McLaughlin and DeCoste. Following Fiamengo's opening account of a rowdy meeting at Queen's University, which Fiamengo accepts as an example of free speech, and then of an effective shutdown of her talk at Ottawa University, Trottier directly defines the absolute position he rejects. Student unions that use the wrong methods to defend their morals, which they see as being superior to the rest of us. Fiamengo follows that up with, when a speaker is actually not able to go forward with the talk, that is bullying and intimidation. My talk was shut down by a few students who felt that they had the right to determine what ideas could be. McLaughlin replies that free speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences, which, quote, unfortunately, can even mean that the debate doesn't happen. Firmengo later reiterates that there was no debate at Ottawa, where she was shut down. And in a crossover between absolutism and evasion, McLaughlin responds, "There was absolutely debate. I witnessed it. I don't think you get to decide what counts as debate." Moderator Pakin, "Everybody shouts at everybody at the same time. Is that a reasonable debate?" McLaughlin, "Is it a reasonable debate? Not necessarily. Is it a debate? Yes." Moderator Pakin, "Is it a desirable debate?" McLaughlin, "Do I get to decide that all debate meets my standards of reasonable? Absolutely not. Do I think that all debates have to meet my standards for what a reasonable debate looks like? Absolutely not. That's where freedom comes in." McLaughlin's denial that she or anyone can say what a reasonable debate is, a repudiation of reason, in itself implies absolutism. We can immediately see that with no definition of what counts as a debate or what a reasonable debate is, it is impossible to say that debate has ever been stopped or prevented, a free licence to shut down debate. Her further comment, "That's where the freedom comes in," makes clear her intention of representing her denial that anyone can define debate as freedom, and her sound grasp of how to invert the logic of democracy. The inability of anyone to define the institutions of democracy is indeed a kind of freedom, that of the pre-civil state of nature, as Enlightenment writers refer to it, or law of the jungle, where people were free to individually exert their power by force over others, and free, of course, to be murdered in their sleep and otherwise live without the security of the civil social contract, which says we all agree to concede our individual power to observance of agreed common laws, so we all enjoy the security of a civil state. The law of the jungle is, quite clearly, so far as free speech is concerned, what nobody being able to define debate implies in the universities, as the suppression of speakers by force attests. McLaughlin expertly lays the ground for an elitist, monarchical absolutism. For the thousands of years and throughout the world before the 18th century Enlightenment defined democracy, the handful of exceptions including ancient Greece and a longer parliamentary history in England, the effect of the state of nature has been monarchical and authoritarian rule. That is, by whoever had a big enough army to get to be monarch and to suppress unwanted ideas. The final phase of McLaughlin's absolutism is that the consequence of an attempt at debate being stopped is that the person attempting the debate should change their views. McLaughlin, "One of the things that facing the consequences of free speech does is force you to confront the consequences of what you are saying. You are making a vast array of claims about rape victims, about feminists, about women, about those who disagree with you," she's addressing Firmengo, "that are often specious arguments based on very little evidence or are twisted to be provocative. And I think that perhaps a productive use of your conversation and protest would be to rethink some of what you are saying." This adds further elements of absolutism to McLaughlin's unrestricted licence to shut down debate. It makes clear that the appropriate consequence of free speech is for the person shut down to change their views. Second, McLaughlin's reference to often specious arguments makes clear her sense of absolute power to determine which arguments are to be heard and which excluded. In sum, McLaughlin can judge views unacceptable and provide unlimited licence for them to be shut down until they are changed. I'll leave McLaughlin's thinking about the public universities and other restrictions on speakers to discussion of DeCoste. I should also note that McLaughlin says she would not support the pulling of fire alarms to break up a meeting, to support which would apparently be illegal. McLaughlin also says, in response to Firmengo's argument that the university is a place, quote, where we can work through ideas in a rational way, not through emotion, not through shouting, not through accusation, where you challenge what you believe to be false with evidence. McLaughlin, I absolutely believe that. apparently supporting the opposite of what she spends most of the program supporting. She repeatedly supports the use of every means possible, whatever means they have, by people she sees as silenced to make themselves heard. I'll begin looking at DeCoste's absolutism with her belief in her capacity to judge the correctness of opinions with an absolute certainty which justifies her deciding that others should not hear them. Freedom of expression doesn't guarantee you the right to dispel your drivel, really, just untruths. When asked for an example of this, DeCoste says, when somebody says that the statistics that we've been based on forever are wrong, and therefore, rape is not as much of an issue as it should be, I think that draws laughter, if not crying, because it's just so preposterous. So if she, Fiamengo, wants to speak, that's fine, but she doesn't get to have the forum of a public university, paid for by my and your taxes to disseminate that information. Trottier confronts this directly. We all pay our taxes. Free speech starts from a very simple premise. I may be wrong. I am fallible in my opinion. You were just referring to what happened where what Janice was saying is drivel. I don't think that I am in a position where I can decide for everybody's sake what's drivel and what's to be heard. And when we have opponents who set themselves up as arbiters, who block the doors so that students can't judge for themselves what's drivel and what's maybe a gem of wisdom, I think there's a problem there. DeCoste's emphasis is therefore on preventing or cancelling the invitations to speak of those who disagree with her. Thus, DeCoste, having decided that what Fiamengo says about rape is drivel, says Fiamengo should be denied the forum of the public university, her reference to my and your taxes not ringing true. Trottier and Fiamengo are hardly likely to support DeCoste's taxes overriding their own. Insofar as DeCoste is referring to people outside the agenda program when she says your taxes, she determines on behalf of all Canadian taxpayers, apart from those who supported her objections at Ottawa University, that their taxes should not be used to support Fiamengo's alleged drivel, a standard quasi-monarchical absolutist approach, apparently questionable even in terms of feminist complaints about taxpayer groups Fiamengo does support, like men. DeCoste's monarchicalism is classic. She elaborates the grounds of her objections. It's just not right. Her later reference to misuse of taxes is just to her own. DeCoste also participated in a successful attempt to stop Ann Coulter speaking at Ottawa University, an exercise which she says involved telling the university that alumni might not contribute to it financially or offer students jobs. She maintains the societal moral order. So that was a right move. Again, DeCoste's taxes should override the taxes of those who would support Ann Coulter's speaking. Not just supporters of Ann Coulter, but people who believe all views should be considered. DeCoste expresses a further proposal arising from the Ann Coulter episode in conjunction with one of Fiamengo's talks. Paken inquires about the university as a safe place for views to be discussed. DeCoste replies, "There's a difference between a monologue and a debate. What I saw at Queen's University was a monologue by Janice. That is not a debate. A debate would be Ann Coulter and an antidote or a fact-checker checking her every time she said something that makes no sense and giving the alternate explanation. That's a debate. That would be a great way for universities to welcome these radicals, these so-called radicals, and have a discussion. But letting them have free rein is not a good way to educate our young people's minds." Both Trottier and McLaughlin come in on this, and I think it provides useful insight as to whether we are dealing with reasonable people or absolutist fanatics. Trottier refers to DeCoste's proposal as a control, and McLaughlin responds, "I think it is interesting that an alternate voice is called a control there. So Rachel proposed that if Ann Coulter came to speak, there should be two people speaking representing different perspectives, and you said that Rachel wanted... It's cut off. Trottier, you are defining the terms of an appropriate debate and banning any other. That's control. DeCoste and McLaughlin are clearly talking about two different things, even though it is equally clear that McLaughlin supports DeCoste. McLaughlin changes DeCoste's antidote and fact-checker, etc., to two people speak representing different perspectives, the format of a standard debate, and in doing so, while supporting DeCoste, seems at the same time to acknowledge that DeCoste's specific proposal is eccentrically unrealistic. It is support in intention, but not in particular substance. But McLaughlin's attempt to shift to a more credible position has problems of its own. Everyone knows the standard debate format of opposing speakers, and different agencies use either solo voices or debate as they choose from time to time. Ottawa University seems happy with the solo voice on occasions, Fiamengo, Coulter, with Q&A apparently. Trottier tells us Coulter spoke at several venues. Television favours debate and critical interview, the press, solo articles for generic reasons. Audiences are happy to attend either. Listeners to this talk of mine are hearing a solo voice, but YouTube has debates for them like the one I'm discussing, and so on. So rather than there being a question here of one presentation format always being better than another, it does look like an attempt by McLaughlin and DeCoste to say they should decide for everyone that one format only is appropriate for certain speakers. But of course, from that, for everyone, unless one concedes their absolutist judgment of speakers. That is, Trottier is correct. It's a format ban on Coulter and apparently Fiamengo. Authoritarianism, absolutism. The only way this isn't a question of a situation where everyone is freely choosing between standard options is if you take DeCoste's proposal literally, as stated. No one considers that an option here but DeCoste. McLaughlin knows she can't. But there are problems about DeCoste's proposal which the alternate perspective invoked by McLaughlin doesn't have. It's a common view that a single mind is capable of a breadth of analysis, coherence and synthesis that collective thinking can't match. A camel is a horse designed by a committee. McLaughlin might recognise that idea from her teaching of J.S. Mill. So DeCoste's proposal is to ensure that individual coherence in the presentation of ideas, monologues, is lost to her opponents. How, we wonder, would the antidote or fact-checker cope if Coulter or Fiamengo expressed a new idea, since it would be impossible to tell when it made no sense before it had been expressed? In the end, I think McLaughlin sinks or swims with DeCoste, and the answer appears to be sinks. Which version of the alternate voice you take, not making much difference. DeCoste is a motivational speaker and a press blogger. Would she support either her antidote or fact-checker, or just McLaughlin's alternate voice as a permanent imposition on herself whenever she speaks or writes? Where is the antidote when McLaughlin is teaching her university classes, or is making sure that opponents always face an alternate voice, a device for defending what her solo voice says to her students? I'd be interested in an antidote for McLaughlin when she is teaching Mill, if I could take the idea seriously. As I will argue in the Leadershiping Talk 5, these elites always sell out their followers. Either way, what DeCoste and McLaughlin suggests is a denial of everyone's intellectual individuality. The speaker to state their own view, the listener to critique and respond, to listen to others' different views, to challenge, to debate, to watch debates, etc. It looks like nobody is to have individual opinions except DeCoste, McLaughlin and their supporters. And consistent with the analysis of DeCoste and McLaughlin as absolutes, that would be right, as DeCoste might say. I think few listeners to this talk will doubt the implications of they themselves always having to have a fact checker or an alternate voice on hand when they express opinions. What starts as a device for suppressing culture, then fiamengo, becomes the same slippery slope that violations of free speech always involve. If culture and fiamengo, why not everyone? Only absolutists know why not themselves. Realistically, no speaker could accept an engagement on the fact-checker terms of DeCoste. I imagine listeners to this talk will draw their own conclusions about whether DeCoste's absolutism has reached a fanaticism which affects her contact with reality, perhaps based on whether McLaughlin seems to be wondering about this. But this is, I suggest, a common effect of ideology. With due respect to DeCoste, some of whose ideas I agree with, even if she finds that hurtful and offensive, I have to say that it is Professor McLaughlin who demonstrates the classic grasp of anti-democratic logic. She sells absolutism to university students, DeCoste sells it to her readers and listeners, and it is very saleable, as the French revolutionaries recognised. Which of us has never wanted to have a touch of royalty and divine right? Please retweet, follow, share and save. Also listen to the YouTube debate if you can. Talk 1B, free speech on agenda, you are silencing them. B, fabrication follows. Thanks.